Okay, we are back with part two of the United States Legislature, Congress, as we call it. We are going to kind of change track and look at the structure and the way that policy is formed in Congress. Public policy is basically just the rules and the things that Congress does. So basically laws and regulations, right? That's generally the understanding of what public policy is. So Congress is structured, more often than not, it is structured to not make public policy, which is to say that most things that get written by members of Congress end up dying in committee. So it's a really kind of Byzantine, difficult system to get through. It's tough for a bill to become a law. Let's just say that, make it simple, okay? All right. So, of course, we have a bicameral legislature, which you should know, just kind of based on your knowledge of U.S. government and history. But what a bicameral legislature is that you have two houses, right? We talk about the Great Compromise and how that leaves us with two houses. Well, when considering how difficult it is for a bill to become a law, part of that is because you have two houses. The same bill must pass both houses after making its way through committees. And what are committees? Well, committees are where most of the work gets done in Congress, both the legislative work as well as the work of oversight. And we'll talk about what those things are. But there are four different types of committees. You could break this down. You know, some people say that there are more types, but we're just going to stick with four. Okay, the four types of committees are standing committees, and standing committees just cover general policy areas. So, such as like agriculture, there's an agriculture committee, and bills that deal with agriculture usually will go to the agricultural committee. And the agricultural committee is going to be composed of people that either come from an ag state or have some background in agriculture, right? And you can think of just kind of general policy areas, so like defense and things like this. You can look up a list of the standing committees in the House and Senate. Joint committees, they connect the House and Senate. So there's some sort of committee that has members of both the House and Senate to facilitate ease in lawmaking. Conference committees. So conference committees are really important because you have to reconcile the differences between House and Senate bills. So there are a few different ways that bills can come into being. First, you can have a bill that goes through the House or the Senate, because either can write bills. And then it at some point has to cross over and go to the other house. In that case, the likelihood that all the amendments and that the bills are going to be exactly the same is very low. So you have to create a conference committee to reconcile those differences, because for a bill to become a law, it has to pass exactly to the T, to the letter, to the dot. It has to be exactly the same in the House and Senate. Okay. So those conference committees are hugely important. Lastly, are select committees. And select committees, generally, we can think of them as like investigative committees. Sometimes they can be temporary. So famous ones are like, there's one, I think it might be still around, and it's investigating climate change. Another is like the Benghazi committee. Right, I believe there's a 9/11 committee. So like basically something that requires some level of investigation. Okay. Now, contrary to our expectations and our thoughts about democracy, most bills never even get voted on by Congress, by a full Congress, right? 90% of them die in committee. They are sent to committees, oftentimes to die. They'll be sent to a hostile committee that is composed of members of the opposite party, and they'll die there. Okay, so literally 90% or more die in committee. So let's look at some of the big differences between the House and Senate. So the House and Senate have kind of big distinctions in terms of what they can actually do, their functions. And if you think like a framer, kind of remember the positions that they're in. The House was meant to represent the people, whereas the Senate was meant to represent the states. Okay, so this thing out. So again, the House was made to represent the people, and the Senate was made to represent the states. So all revenue bills, that is, think taxes, must originate in the House of Representatives. Again, all revenue bills have to originate in the House of Representatives. That's really important because that's our money, right? And we want to ensure that our money is well spent and goes to the right places. Secondly, the House passes all articles of impeachment. Okay, people get very confused about this and don't really know how the system works. So think about impeachment as being like a formal indictment, and what the House's role in that is to bring up charges, bring up an indictment. They do not, in the House of Representatives, vote to remove the president. That is the job of the Senate. Okay, the House of Representatives does not remove the president or Supreme Court justice or whoever ends up getting impeached. Okay, that happens in the Senate. So the House of Representatives just passes the articles of impeachment, which is like you've been formally charged, and then it moves on to the Senate. Okay. All right. Primarily, the primary roles, if we look at it for the House, is policy making. So this is really important. These are the things that influence the budget. So the House of Representatives tends to be very influential over the budget. Now, when we look at the role of committees and the structure, it's hugely important. In the House of Representatives, committees, structure, and seniority are very important. Remember how many members there are, right? There's 435 members of the House of Representatives. Oftentimes, these are younger than members of the Senate, slightly less prestigious. So it's kind of like wrangling a lot of people, right? So you have to have strict rules. Seniority ends up being really important because seniority can kind of, okay, these people have been here for a long period of time, and as such, they can kind of initiate the younger members, okay? Now, the Senate has some really important powers itself, and these are distinct from those of the House. So the Senate has the power to give advice and consent's the important one, right? Advice and consent to presidential nominations and approve treaties. So let's talk about advice and consent first, right? That basically means that when the president makes their nominations, then the Senate has to approve, okay? So that gives a check over the president. This is what one of those checks, when we talk about checks and balances, you hear checks and balances again and again in the context of government, in the context of U.S. government at least. This is what we're talking about. So this first one, advice and consent, is a check on the president by Congress, right? The president can't just put whoever they want into office without approval. Now, if you have a divided government, basically meaning that the legislature is controlled by, say, one party and the presidency is controlled by another, then this advice and consent gets really difficult, right? Because the opposing party might not want to give the president their nominations, right? So that's really important. Secondly, approving treaties. So treaties don't happen that often because they're binding. They're really strong laws, and the United States does not like to bind itself to any sort of international agreement or laws. It likes to do its own thing because we are, or at least we have been for a while, a hegemon, meaning that we are a global superpower. So why would we limit ourselves and connect ourselves to some sort of limitation when we see things like, treaties coming out after World War II and things like that? But generally, we don't like to do that because we like to be able to do whatever we want to do. But if we do want to sign a treaty, then the Senate has to approve it, right? So the president is going to be the one that initiates that, and then it has to be approved by the Senate. Okay. Now, moving on to impeachment. The Senate is the one that tries the impeachments. Okay. That means that they vote to remove or not the president or whatever member of government is impeached. Okay. At the policy level, the Senate is more influential over foreign affairs, and that comes from that treaty power in large part, right? Now, committees are still important, but structure and seniority is less important, right? You can think of the Senate as being more composed of peers. Members have been in politics longer, and generally they're more prestigious. Okay, so being a senator, you serve a longer period of time. You serve 6 years, whereas being a member of Congress, you only serve 2 years. It's just kind of seen as kind of a more prestigious and more colloquial atmosphere. Okay. So the House and Senate are not mirror images of one another, and this should be clear right now that at this point we're seeing that there are some significant differences between the House and the Senate. So congressional leadership is different. In the House, leadership is more important, and the Speaker, I've just got a joke right here, the Speaker is all-powerful. The Speaker's not quite all-powerful, but they do have very important powers and are a very important person. Okay? So let's look at House leadership first. So House leadership is composed of the Speaker of the House, who is incredibly powerful in determining who goes to committees and what bills go to committees. So what members are assigned to which committees, and then what bills are assigned to each committees. Okay. Underneath that, each party has their leaders. In the majority party, that means the party that has the most members of the House, or the majority. And the minority is the group that has, or the party that has fewer members. So the majority and minority leaders and whips, they usually work to ensure that members of the party vote with their party. And you might think that that's a given, but they're not all the same. There's not complete homogenization when it comes to the beliefs and the interest of members of the same party. However, parties have become increasingly homogenous over time. Okay, they used to be very kind of mixed up, and you used to have really conservative Democrats and really liberal Republicans. Now that's almost universally not the case. Okay, all right. Moving forward, Senate leadership. So Senate leadership. Two important people that I'm going to mention. The vice president. So the vice president's really important, but really only in name only. The vice president is actually the president of the Senate, but their only real role is to break ties. So that's. Whoa, skipped forward. That's really their only role in the Senate. The majority leader, on the other hand, is the one that really leads the Senate. And they, like in the House, encourage party line voting. Now, where can I put myself to where I'm not in the way? I'll move myself as there we go. So, legislation. So what is legislation? So legislation is, the process through which we get laws, the process through which Congress writes laws. So in this context, we're going to look at how a bill becomes law, and we're going to keep this very, 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 very short. It's a really complex and convoluted process, but for your purposes and for the purpose of 99.99% of Americans, You don't need to know every in and out of the process. Okay, so what you do need to know is that bills are drafted by members and then they're referred to committees. Hey, there comes a speaker who sends them to committees, and 90% of those bills die an excruciating death. Not really, obviously. They just disappear. They don't move on, right? They don't move on or go anywhere, and then they ultimately don't see the light of day. Okay, those that do make it through still have a really arduous journey. Right? They have to go through a rules committee in the House of Representatives that determines the length of debate on the floor, how many amendments can be added. Then they go to floor action, where other members can attach amendments to them to make them more palatable, to add pork to them. And then they go to a floor vote. And if they make it through the floor vote, then they go to the other house completely and go through that whole system again. Okay? And it's only once it goes through all of that process that a bill actually becomes law. And it's not even then, because then it's still got to be voted on, passed, and then it has to go to the president, who can sign or veto. And if the president vetoes, then it has to go back to the House, back to both branches, who have to override that veto. Okay, so it's a very kind of complex process, and it takes a lot of time, and it's difficult to get done. And this is because, to some extent, it was designed that way, to make laws difficult to make in this country. There were a lot of concerns about the fickle nature of the masses or whatever, and they didn't want all kinds of laws just to be made willy-nilly. Again, that is, certainly refers to some of the prejudices that some of the framers had. Though the process has become more complicated over time, not necessarily 100% due to the founders, okay? But that basic process was there. Okay, so what else do we have? Congress is also in charge of what's known as oversight. Now, oversight is it's basically the idea that Congress isn't just going to make a law and then turn it over to the executive branch and let them do whatever they want, right? Congress writes and passes bills. However, it's actually the executive branch that's generally tasked with faithfully executing the laws. Right? Well, if you're a Democratic Congress and you write a law and then you have a Republican as president, are you going to assume that the Republican as president is going to faithfully execute those laws and just let them do whatever they want? Or, it could be a Republican Congress. Are you going to assume that the Democrats are faithfully executing your laws? So Congress, basically, and this is back in the committees, they're in charge of ensuring that the work that the laws that they created actually get done. Okay, so committees assign budgets and they monitor the agencies that are tasked with executing the laws that they've created. Okay, all right. So we are going to stop there. That takes us through the American legislature, and hopefully that helped you guys out, and you guys will know a little bit more about this than when you came in. All right, thanks. Bye.